So far, we discussed how with the transition of Mughal Empire and the decline of Mughal Empire, the instability in the political scenario in India started to grow, and as a result, there were independent states which were created. Now, these independent states were constantly at war with one another. There was constant internal mutiny, and as a result, the foreign powers who landed onto India had more control than the local powers. The three important foreign powers that came to India were the Portuguese, French, and the British, of which, as we have understood in the previous lectures, there was Anglo-French rivalry, and as a result, British established their supremacy, and French had to leave the region. Finally, after the Battle of Plassey and Battle of Buxar, it was well understood that it is the British who moved as a trading company to actually establishing administrative power in India. So in this section, we would understand the impact of the policies of British in India. Let's first talk about the economic policies in India. To begin with, there was a fundamental change in the lifestyle of the people. The villages in India were self-sufficient. People had well classified division of hierarchy. There were artisans, traders, so on and so forth, and every person was actually getting enough for their cause within the village. However, when Britishers had an advent, they started to drain the resources, and when the resources started to drain, there was scarcity within the society because the peasants had to pay a huge amount to the zamindars. The zamindars started to become loyal to the Britishers, and as a result, the hierarchy within the society saw a clear demarcation and a differentiation. Stratification within the society started, and the self-sufficiency, which was part of the villages, saw a breakdown. So this had a great deep economic implication on the policies of India. As a result, there were new forms of production, new forms of consumption, and even cultural movements started to grow. So these were some of the basic ideas that led to a change in the Indian concept. Again, with the growing industrial revolution that started in Britain, because of the industrial revolution which started in Britain, what happened was Indian market was flooded with cheap goods. The cheap goods were actually cheap in India. Why? Because there was no duty which was imposed to the goods coming to India. However, the goods which were exported from India, if they were finished products like cloth, if it was exported from India, it was levied high charges in Britain, and therefore it did not remain competitive in the British market. So the Indian processed or finished products did not find market abroad, and the processed products coming into India, the processed cloth coming into India was made in factories and had a relatively lesser cost, was much cheap in the Indian market, and therefore the Indian system started to drain. Now, who were the main consumers of these products and commodities? The kings, the nobility. And these kings and nobility found that these products which are coming from Britain are at a relatively cheaper price. So they started to go for the British products, and as a result, what happened was the local artisans started to deteriorate. The condition of the local craftsmen, local artisans started to deteriorate, and this was another implication that led to a deeper stratification within the society. So those are some of the founding basis for the economic policies. In the next section, we would understand economic policies were not just confined to the cloth and the trade, but there were numerous other things. For example, land revenue. We would also discuss the changes in the educational system, the cultural reforms, the transport in the next. Land revenue system is one of the fundamental systems that led to a deeper implication and economic drain in India. So three important land revenue systems were brought in India. If I draw the map of India here, on the map of India, if you want to understand, in the regions of Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, that is the northern region, was the system which is known as Mahalwari. On the eastern side, which is the present Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, the system was permanent settlement. And in the south, the provinces of Bombay and Madras, the system was known as Rothbari System. So three different land revenue systems which were organized. Now let's understand each of these land revenue systems one by one. First of all, we'll understand the systems whom they were propounded by. So permanent settlement was given by Lord Cornwallis. And Lord Cornwallis gave this system in the year 1793. The next was Ryotwari System. Rothbari System was given by Reed and Thomas Munro. So two important persons, Reed and Munro, who laid down the Rothbari System, and this was in 1792. Finally, the Mahalwari System, and this was brought by William Bentinck. And William Bentinck brought this system in 1822. Now, what was the difference in the land revenue? The idea was, as Britishers transformed from a trading community to an administrative community, what they did was they wanted revenue. Why they wanted money? They wanted money to maintain their expenses related to their army, expenses related to their establishments, to run their businesses and even the industries in Britain. So for all those purposes, they required revenue. Now, these governor generals were looking for generating revenue. So what was the best source? In India, the best source of revenue generation they found was land. So three important systems started to grow. The permanent settlement was a unique system where zamindars were made or given an important position. So what happened? There were people who were cultivators. So they were cultivating the land. Now those farmers or peasants who were cultivating the land had to pay a proportion of their tax to the zamindars, and zamindars had to pay the cash to the British company, and this was the system under permanent settlement. Now, what was the difference in the Rothbari system? In the Rothbari system, Reed and Munro believe that why to involve zamindars? When zamindars are involved, we don't get a substantial proportion out of it. So, just throw away the zamindars and interact directly with the cultivators. So, they called the peasants as Roths. And therefore, the system known as Rothwari, and they started collecting the taxes directly from the farmers. Clear? Now, when they were collecting taxes directly from the farmers, this was highly ineffective because the tax rates were increasing constantly and it was becoming difficult for the farmers to survive. The next system, which was introduced in the Northwest Frontier Province in the regions of Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, was Mahalwari System. Mahalwari System was a little different from permanent settlement and Rothbari System. Under permanent settlement and Rothbari System, we said either the land tax has to be given by one way or the other. So either the cultivator gives it to the zamindar and zamindar gives it to the company. But under permanent settlement, it was felt that zamindars are the middlemen. So why keep them? Remove them. So in the Rothbari system, from the farmers, direct tax collection was done by the state. So state or the company we can say. But the only thing was the zamindars were removed, but the taxes and the implications on the peasants remained the same. The Mahalwari system grew as a result of private establishments and private developments, and it said that sometimes it might so happen that peasants do not have enough to give them. to give the tax or to pay the tax. So what can be done is, let them keep their land or actually give the land to someone else, sell off the land or keep their land on a contractual basis, against which they can get some money and pay their taxes. So that system was allowed in Mahalwari system. So we'll understand each of these three systems one by one. This was just a background information to have a clear difference between the three systems. So to start with permanent settlement. Permanent settlement was started, as we said, by Lord Cornwallis. He was the second Governor General to Bengal and he started the system in 1793. And the idea was definitely to collect revenue, very obvious. The state wanted the revenue to maintain their army, to maintain their establishments and to run their industries. The taxes were paid by the farmers to the zamindars, and zamindars were forced to actually pay the tax only in cash. This is again important. Zamindars could not pay in kind. So zamindars had to pay in cash to the company. The zamindars' right of ownership was made hereditary. That means the son of zamindar would automatically become a zamindar, and that was a way to keep them loyal to the company. So this was one of the ways the zamindars were kept loyal to the company so that they don't raise their voice against the company. Another important thing that we need to understand. Now, since this happened, the whole system of tenancy was in the hand of zamindars, and zamindars started to become a dominant section in the society. The peasants, the cultivators, the farmers had no say. So the position of the farmers, the peasants or the cultivators deteriorated and they were living at the mercy of the zamindar. That's very important to note under this system. So initially it was in the regions of Bengal and Bihar. Later it was extended to parts of Orissa, north districts of Madras, the present day Chennai, and even in the east of Uttar Pradesh, that is the regions of Varanasi. So that was the extent which it is spread to, but this system was not appraised by a lot, since there was huge plight onto the farmers and the cultivators. So the next system which ran in parallel was the Rothbari system, brought by, as we discussed, Reed and Munro in 1792, and under this system the taxes were directly collected from the farmers. But there were three important drawbacks of the system. First was the land revenue which was fixed for the farmers was exorbitantly high. The farmers found it difficult to pay. The second important was the government had a limited ability to increase the revenue at any time they wanted. So this was for a fixed period of 20 to 30 years and was updated every 20 to 30 years. So if they wanted to change it, increase it in between, it was actually very difficult. And the third important thing was when the produce was done, either if the produce is good, the farmers can definitely pay it. But sometimes, let's say if it is a famine that has struck the region, what would happen? The farmers would not be in a position to pay the revenue, but still they were forced to pay the revenue. And as a result, the state of farmers, or who were called as Roths, deteriorated significantly under the Rothbari system. But the most important thing under the Ryotwari system was there was no concept of zamindars, and this system was popular in the regions of Bombay and Madras in the south regions. Now, since there was a direct interaction with the cultivators, it was again important to know that the zamindars were replaced by whom? They were replaced by one single zamindar. So what we could say was the company, and that British company became one single zamindar. So rather than having many zamindars, it was just a single zamindar in the hands of whom fell the complete system of land revenue. Right? So this was the second important system that we discussed, which was the Rothbari system. The third important system is the Mahalwari system, which developed in the regions of Ganga Valley, Northwest Frontier Province, the regions of Punjab and the west of Uttar Pradesh, which is basically the area of Ganga, as we said. So the revenue was made on village to village or mandal to mandal, as it was called as. So mandal was also called as estate. So estate to estate or village to village settlement was introduced. Now, as we mentioned, if the farmer or the peasant is not able to pay the revenue, what was done? A private land ownership model was created, and this private land ownership model said that either you could keep your land on a contractual basis, you could transfer the land to someone else, or in extreme cases you can sell the land. So those were the options which were given to the cultivators, that they had the right to transfer the land or sell the land. If the land could not be transferred or sold, then the government was not in a position to collect the revenue. So government by all means wanted to keep itself safe. So government wanted that our revenue should not suffer, and since our revenue should not suffer, do what you can, what it takes to do. So either transfer the land to someone and then pay our taxes, or sell a parcel of land and then pay our taxes. But we require the taxes from our end. Because the system was introduced, because they found that under the under the Rothbari system and the permanent settlement, it was getting difficult for the company to collect the revenue. Again, one of the drawbacks of permanent settlement was British company felt that their revenue is divided between them and the zamindars. So they are not getting what they actually can get. A little of it, a proportion of it goes to the zamindars. So company was always keeping a keen eye on getting more revenue, and since they found that permanent settlement was not a good option, Mahalwari was relatively better, because by some means or the other we can actually get the revenue. Now again, collection of revenue went smooth during the time the things were well, but there were episodes of severe famine. Now when there were episodes of severe famine, why they happened? They happened because there was large scale poverty, and under the British company, they started to grow cash crops which could earn them money. For example, sugarcane, indigo, opium, and as a result, the basic crops of wheat and rice were not grown. So there was an acute food shortage which came in India, and this was one of the causes which were deep rooted for making the cultivators further poor. Because of those periods of famine, they were not in a position to pay more, and the company wanted their share by all means. So there was a fundamental change in the system which was introduced under the Mahalwari system, and this was the idea of private land ownership, under which the people were allowed to transfer the land to someone or sell the land to someone, and in lieu of them pay the taxes to the company. So this was one of the ways they thought would maintain stability in collection of the revenue system, and these are the three important land revenue systems that were prevalent in India. All the three land revenue systems, the differences between those three we have discussed. Extremely important content that you must be familiar with. Next, we would understand is the concepts related to the drain of wealth and the changes in the education. Not confined to one thing. Trade and industry was another important segment. Now, India produced a lot of cloth, a lot of craftsman items, but the main thing, as we understood in the initial sections, is what the kings, the nobility, were the main purchaser of the things which were developed by the village handicrafts. So handicrafts was one of the major industries in India, and the villages were self-sufficient because what villagemen were producing, those were purchased or procured by the nobility, by the kings. Now the craftsmen patronized by the kings or the nobility had classically unique work in their field. They were either building good ornaments, they were building, they were making clothes, or there were numerous other segments in which they were specialized. Now what happened was, Indian weaver could not actually compete with the prices of the product coming from Britain. So once the industrial revolution started and there was cheap flow of goods in India, what happened was the Indian weaver was not that competitive. The Indian weaver, the Indian craftsmen did not stand competitive with the machine-made products. And as a result, what happened was there was a heavy demand for the goods which were brought into India at a cheaper price. Now, the things which were made in India initially found their market in the Britain, but later on British implied heavy taxes on the commodities which were exported from India. Now when heavy taxes were imposed, what happened? These things became non-competitive in the British market. So they did not found any demand in the British market, and the cheap goods which were flowing into India found a huge market because there was no duty which was imposed. These goods came as duty-free goods in India. That means there were no extra charges which were levied onto them. And therefore, this imbalance of the trade started. Now, this concept has been called by the intellectuals of India as the concept of drain of wealth. Why it was called as a drain of wealth? Because the raw material, the resources left India to Britain. So, I mark this region as India and this region as Britain. So, what happened was the raw materials moved from India to Britain, and from Britain to India came the finished products. Right? Now, when raw materials were moving from India to Britain, this did not found any economic gains. So, there were no economic returns on the raw material. What witnessed economic returns was the finished goods, but those finished goods we were importing as a country. So, those were imported in India and the loss had to be definitely borne by the country. Under this concept, Dadabhai Naoroji wrote a text, and that was in 1871, that he said or composed Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. The basic idea behind the works of Poverty and Un-British Rule in India was that the transfer of the resources from India to Britain is costing a huge amount to India, and nearly 9% of the India's national income is continuously drained in this process. However, if we focus on statistical facts and figures, those are not well described in the text, but whatsoever data we have, based on that, it was after the revolt of 1857, it is believed that nearly 6% of the national income was drained and 1/3 of the country's savings were affected. So 1/3 of the national savings were affected and drained to Britain, which was a significantly high amount. The wealth was transferred as remittance, purchase of goods for consumption, profit from the trade activities, and it was believed that between 1758 to 1764 itself, so within this period of 6 years only, there was a 6 million pounds of trade that happened, and that was equivalent to the 4 times land revenue collection of the Nawab of Bengal, which was a significantly huge amount. So this drain of wealth affected the country and the developments within the country. The taxes which were derived from India were not used for the people of India, but was used for the goods of or the welfare of the Britishers. The next important is the transport and the communication. Now, transport and the communication is important. Why the transport and communication is started? The first important reason was they wanted to keep themselves well connected. They don't wanted to keep themselves segregated. So, strategically, it was very important for them to keep themselves connected, because if there is any uprising, if there is any revolt against them, they should be well connected to their other people in different parts of the country. So for that, they require transport and communication, and also transport and communication was essential to drain the commodities, to drain the resources from India. Four important developments took place. First was railways. The second was roadways. The third was development and building of ports. And the fourth was telegraph. Telegraph was important, as I said, to keep themselves connected. So for quicker communication, telegraphs were used. Railway, the first railway line was developed in 1853 and this was from Mumbai to Thane. Then in 1854, Kolkata got connected to the nearby coal fields so that coal could be drained out of the country. Then in 1856, there was a train that was built between the region of Madras and Arakonam. By 1905, within India, the extent was nearly 28,000 miles. A significant amount of railway line was laid in just 50 years period. This formed a quick means of transportation, a safe means of transportation, a cheaper means of transportation, a cost-effective means of transportation. Also, it was a way of mixing people across cultures. So, when people were traveling across the regions, they were communicating, interacting with people from different culture, different religion, different caste, different background, and moreover, this was the basis for the growth of industries because the raw materials could be easily transported, and also when there was famine in those times, these railways or roadways were an important source of transportation of the food and commodity to the regions which were famine hit. So those were some of the important reasons why transport and communication became important. The next is the intellectual awakening. Now, the intellectual awakening came with the cultural and the social impact. The various things which were prevalent in the Indian society need to be abolished and removed. So, Lord William Bentinck talked about abolition of Sati Pratha in India, and that was in 1829. His idea of abolition of Sati was supported by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and Raja Ram Mohan Roy from India became one of the leaders of this concept. The next was, there was a huge female infanticide, that is death of a daughter if born, which was prevalent in the country, and again this concept got abolished. So there were definitely social developments. Another important thing was, sometimes as a part of religious practice, little children were sacrificed to please the gods, and this thing was again abolished as a part of the social awakening. Another important thing was the concept of widow remarriage. The concept of widow remarriage was strengthened by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and finally in 1856, Lord Dalhousie abolished this idea and said that widows should be allowed to remarry. However, we have already understood about Lord Dalhousie, his policies of expansionism, but despite his policies of annexations and expansion, this was one of the major social developments which was during the time of Lord Dalhousie, which was abolition of the concept of widow not being allowed to marry and allowing the widow to remarry. The next was in 1891, the child marriage was stopped and slavery was again abolished. So some of the very important social changes and developments that took place. The next is in the field of education. Now in the field of education, if we see, there were numerous changes, but the educationists believed that there was constant drain of the resources from India. So it was one of the Britishers, John Sullivan, who was the president of the Board of Revenue, and he said, the thing acts like a sponge. That means all the good things are taken from the banks of Ganga and squeezed in the river of Thames, that is London. So that was the concept which was popular during that time. But the education was one of the key founding stones that led to the awakening, the change in the mindset of the people. So the first important educational development was brought by Lord Macaulay, and Lord Macaulay, his minutes are popular as the Minutes of Indian Education in 1935. He is also known as the founder of British education system in India. So what he is called as founder of British education system in India. He was a member of the Law Council in the Council of William Bentinck. So in the Council of William Bentinck, Lord Macaulay was a law member. He brought a change in the Indian education system which had predominantly three objectives. The first and the foremost objective was very simple. They wanted to create a bridge between the Britishers and the millions of Indians. A thing that could connect or help interact Britishers to the millions of Indians. So for that, education was important. So connection as a bridge. The second important development or the objective which led to the educational reforms by Macaulay was he wanted Indians to be Indians in blood and color, but he wanted them to be Britishers in taste and intellect. That means he wanted Indians should do what Britishers want them to do. As simple as that. The third important thing was he wanted to develop a class of clerks, a class of clergy or clerks for subordinate jobs. To assist the Britishers, they required a set of clerks, and the idea to expand this education was to develop this clerical level positions in the education system. He strongly believed that one good shelf of European library is equivalent to the whole native education system of India, and wanted that English should be the predominant mode of education, and not only English should be the predominant language or medium of instructions, science and Western literature should be taught. So those were some of the predefined ideas which were led by Lord Macaulay. Then came the Charter Act of 1813. Under the Charter Act of 1813, it was the amount of nearly 1 lakh rupees was sanctioned for educating the Indians, and this amount was sanctioned for educating the Indians, but there was a constant debate between what? The debate between Orientalists and Angelists. Orientalists said that the native traditional concepts are good. They should be taught and propagated. However, Angelists were of the view that Western education system is extremely important and must be imparted wholeheartedly. The next important thing that we see was following the lines of Lord Macaulay. In 1835, William Bentinck said that English should be the medium of instruction. In 1844, those people who knew English were given preference in employment opportunities. So those Indians who knew English were given priority when they were appointed for various jobs and positions. And finally in 1854 came the Wood's Dispatch. Now this Wood's Dispatch was given by Lord Woods or Charles Wood, Lord Charles Wood. Now Charles Wood's dispatch is still one of the founding grounds for the education system in India. So this was the education system which was laid down by Charles Wood under the Wood's Dispatch 1854. Extremely important, and still it is the founding stone. Why it is the founding stone? Because under this Wood's Dispatch, three important universities came up in India: the Calcutta University, the Madras University, and the Bombay University. Now, these three universities were established, and during that time, it was said that these universities would confer degrees and have the education system would hold examination, and each of these universities would have a chancellor, vice chancellor. So there was a complete framework which was assigned for the university, and the Roorkee Engineering College was one of the technical education systems which was developed. So Wood's Dispatch became important. Now, if we talk about the leads under Wood's Dispatch, one of the important points to be noted was promotion of women education, then vocational education, skill building training, teachers training was imparted. The idea was to teach Western education. As we mentioned before, English should be a medium of instruction and science and Western education should be propounded. The next, as I already said, English should be a medium of instruction. The next was very important. Now, all of the sudden you cannot introduce English to the millions of the population. So what was important? To have a primary vernacular language, the local language at the school level, and then slowly introduce them with the Anglo vernacular version. So Wood's Dispatch said that at the local levels, at the grassroots levels, the vernacular language should be there. The concept was very practical because at the local grassroots level, they should be given the primary education in the local language, and slowly as they grow, they should be introduced to the English version. So Anglo vernacular learning should be imparted at the higher level, at the college level, at the district levels. Then, to encourage education in India, grants and aid should be provided by the private organization. That was another important point. Universities, as we have said, three important universities was established: Mumbai, Madras, and Calcutta University, and these three universities were on the model of University of London, and these universities had the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, the Senate, and the Fellows. All of those were appointed by whom? They all were appointed by the government, and as we mentioned, the universities were given right to hold the examination and confer the degrees to the students. The last important thing was, when all of this system was laid down, how would you assess whether the things are moving smoothly or not? So Director of Department of Public Instructions was nominated, one director in each of the 5 provinces, and the role of the director was to submit a report, and that talks about the progress of the level of education in each region. So the director of the Department of Public Instruction was responsible for submitting the report of the progress of education in their respective provinces. So that was the basic 9 things that were laid down under the Wood's Dispatch. These 9 points are extremely important, and still the present education system follows the lines or the basis of the concepts which were laid down under Wood's Dispatch. The national education policies and the modifications have seen most of the content and the concepts being derived from this Wood's Dispatch. So in this lecture, we have understood how Britishers affected the Indian society in terms of economic development, in terms of cultural and social changes, educational reforms, development of transport and communication. But still, despite of the positive developments, there were lots and lots of self-hidden agendas which led to a mutiny amongst the people, and that was the basis for the first War of Independence in India, which is the War of 1857, which we would cover separately.